Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you all about a pediatric OT's favourite topic, sensory processing. This term might be a new term for you, or you might think your child has some difficulties with sensory processing. Whether you've heard of this term a million times or this is a completely new term for you, come along and join me and have a look at these awesome illustrations, and hopefully by the end of this video it'll be a little bit clearer for you. So let's talk first about our senses. We have our vision, our smell, our hearing, our taste, and touch. So these are our external senses, and our ability to engage with them is known as exteroception. Our other senses include proprioception, from Latin proprius, meaning one's own, is about knowing where your body is in space. Interoception. This is about our internal bodily senses. For example, knowing when you're hungry, when you're full, when you need to use a toilet. Vestibular input. This is a sensation that we get that tells us when we are moving, and the fluid in our inner ears signal to the brain what is happening movement-wise. It's like a little X in our brain saying you are here. Great, so those are our 8 senses. Sensory processing refers to the way our body and brain process sensory input and how we make meaning of these sensations to enable us to live our lives. That's a bit of a big explanation. Let me break it down. Sensory processing is essentially how our brain uses everything we see, hear, taste, smell, touch, etc. to help us decide what to do. So, for example, imagine walking into a room and smelling your favorite food. This would mean that you then want to walk into that room and stay in the room and, enjoy that smell. Or alternatively, imagine you're in class, about to fall asleep, and the teacher mentions the words major assignment and failure. Your brain would register these and you would sit up and listen. Integrated sensory processing is the term we use when all of our senses are working together and helping us to live our lives in the best possible way. Integrated sensory processing allows us to live our lives. It allows us to tune into conversations, work meetings, classes, listen, learning, delve deep into those great relationships that make life worth living. It allows us to notice people and events around us, to tune into our environment. Sensory processing allows us to notice social cues, such as changes in facial expressions, inflections, changes in tone of voice. It essentially helps us to be a functioning human being and to engage with this beautiful world around us. But what happens when kids have problems with sensory processing? Sensory processing is not a behavior issue. Sensory processing difficulties are a neurological issue and stem from issues with the brain's ability to process these sensations. When we think of sensory processing, it exists on a spectrum. So let's think of sensory input as a cup. And let's think of a person's tolerance for sensory input as a cup. So imagine a person's tolerance for sensation is very, very small and limited, pictured here by the small cup. So we call this sensory profile sensory defensive or sensory avoidant. Imagine in a typical day, for someone who is sensory sensitive or avoidant of sensory input, this world is really loud and really bright and really scary. Imagine being in the classroom, the school bell is loud, you can hear all the pencils around you, the food that you had this morning was too mushy and you didn't like it, you were bumped in line, the teacher raised their voice and was shouting at you all lesson, and you were just trying to do your work but you couldn't focus, and all of a sudden this really small cup for sensory input that you had it's filled all the way to the top. And so what usually happens is for a child who's sensory defensive or sensory avoidant, they'll hold all of these sensations and emotions and all this build up inside until this child gets home or until this child gets to their safe space, and that's where they'll lose it. And that's where they might have a really big reaction to something tiny, like being asked to do a small chore. We call this a build up of sensory input, and we know this as a sensory meltdown. Now, let's look at the other side of things. Imagine a person whose sensory system seeks sensory input. So if anyone has seen Tigger from Winnie the Pooh, this is the image I want you to have in your mind. Someone always moving, always seeking, seemingly unaware of other people's personal space. A child who is sensory seeking may always be on the go. They might be the child who can never seem to sit still, who has trouble listening to instructions and always needs to be running and on the move. This is a child who has a big cup for sensory input. They need lots and lots of sensory input to be regulated and be in their just right zone. So OTs can do so much with sensory processing, and we work with children and adults every day who are sensitive to sensory input or people who are sensory seeking. I can do more videos in the future talking more about sensory processing and specific ways we work on that. But I think that's all for today. So that's sensory processing in a nutshell. Let me know your thoughts. Come follow my channel for more information. Thank you for joining me.